Ruari. Welcome to the Personal Best podcast.
Super excited to be here. Feel like it's been a long time coming.
It has. It definitely has. But I know that it's going to be such good conversation. I've really been looking forward to it. So
Thank you for having me on.
I'm going to start with a pretty broad question, which is, why have you decided to dedicate a lot of your work to helping people transform their relationship with alcohol?
Well, I don't think it's a decision. Maybe it's another form of compulsion, and we can talk about that. No, I'm joking. I think that in here, there's quite a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And I would say that I think from sort of the early challenges, of which, childhood was very challenging, ADHD, growing up on the Isle of Mull, very disruptive. And I figured out quite early that, that being a child of 5 with very, very busy parents, that the best way to get attention was to set things on fire. And I just became really good at that. So it was a way of getting attention, but it was just the wrong, misguided kind of attention. And I'm very fortunate I had very loving parents. I had, I had a very understanding parents, let's say.
Yeah.
But this difference, I think, is what kind of set me off on this path from very early. I mean, I wrote a letter to Richard Branson when I was 14 about trying to change the world, and set up my first business at 15, and 5 companies by the time I was 25. So I was like,
Wow.
I really want to sort of find something to have an impact.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see, there were a couple of jobs in between there, but I wasn't the job guy. You just know somebody's either going to fit in or is a problem causer. And I liked being disruptive. I liked being avoiding the rules and breaking the rules and all of that. There was very much a culture of that. So I think once I landed on this thing, which was from my own personal experience, right? An oil broker in London, job which required a lot of drinking, a lot of socializing, a lot of normalization of alcohol. It's perfectly normal to go to lunch at 12, come back to the office at 4, blitzed, finish off a bit of work, go back out to the pub, that normal. So when I actually took a break from alcohol, and it changed my life so much, this simple thing, like, oh my God, just this break from alcohol. That's when I started to join this thread of like, oh, you mean if I can have a conversation with somebody, like have a conversation with you here now, and some people listen to this, and that conversation inspires them to reconsider their relationship with alcohol, you mean I can not just change their life, but I could change their family's life? I could change their relationship with their partner. I could change their relationship with their business. Like, this is a gift. This is an incredible tool. I don't know of another tool that I could use that could have such a big impact on somebody's life. So then it kind of solidified as this thing of like, wow, there's this thing where if I spread this message and I keep spreading this message, I have a hugely positive impact on the world. And I think to really bring this round to answer your question, which you'll find I don't have any straight answers. They all go off in random directions. That's the ADHD brain. There was a particular moment. And the particular moment was I had been featured on BBC World News in over 200 countries, a 10-minute feature, which was amazing for our business at the time, just, kind of really shot things up. And a friend of mine who was in Italy at the time called me up and he said, I've just seen what you're doing on the news and I think it's amazing. I'm meeting the Dalai Lama next week. Would you like to meet him? And I'm like, oh, well, let me just check my diary. Let's have a quick look here. And no, of course, went straight over there. And through a series of events, I got to stand on stage and ask the Dalai Lama a question in front of thousands of people in the center of Pisa. And there were a series of quite random events that led to that moment. And I asked him this question, and his answer, which I'll tell you the question, I stood up and I said, we help thousands of people all over the world change their relationship with addictions using what the Tibetan and Buddhist people have known for centuries, things like meditation and stuff like that. what would you say to somebody who's trying to change their relationship with an addiction? And he said, I don't know how to help people who are addicted. I look to people like you who are doing great work in the world. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. But his big thing is what we need to do is teach our children to feel their emotions. Okay? We can talk about emotional regulation later. When I stepped down off that stage, I can only describe it as being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
You know, like, holy shit, this is why I was put on the planet. And I think, you know, this gets me emotional because there's so much charge to that. At that moment, I was like, okay, I can't spend any longer in this job. I know I need to spread this message. I know I need to make this my life's work. So that was 10 years ago. That was no longer than that. That was, 10 years ago. And I don't know how many people around the world have heard this message. It is millions. Hundreds of thousands have been a part of our programs or into our program. The impact and the knock-on impact across the globe of what we are doing and what we continue to do is enormous. It's enormous. It's just so huge. And so, yeah, as you can see, that is what makes it not a decision. It's not like, oh, you know, it's just like, okay, it's an innate knowing.
Yes. And I think that's so great that obviously you realized the positive impact that changing your relationship with alcohol had on your own life. And then you looked at how you could also have such a big impact on other people's lives.
Yeah.
And as I said to you before we started this conversation, I think the topic of alcohol and sobriety is very interesting because there does tend to be two camps of people, the people who drink and then the people who've gone sober. And actually, I think what your work does so brilliantly is sort of find the sweet spot in the middle where people can have a controlled relationship with alcohol.
Yep.
So just to summarize what your work is, tell us a little bit about 1 Year No Beer. What is the purpose of it and how do you help people?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's been a wrigglety little crazy journey over the time. And, you know, when we started out, it was about encouraging people to take a break from alcohol. Without a doubt, getting somebody who is regularly consuming alcohol to take a break is the fastest way for them to understand themselves, the truth of the impact that alcohol is having on them. It's a bit like being caught in the matrix. We're so blindsided, we're so marketed to, we're so conditioned, socially conditioned over decades and decades and decades that we have this made-up story about alcohol inside our head and we don't realize it. And I think it takes a moment of pulling yourself out of the Truman Show for a moment to go, good Lord, what the hell are we doing? And I think the fastest way to convince somebody to do that, I tried with the whole evangelical, you're being crazy, alcohol is rubbish, but nobody wants to listen to that. So the fastest way to get people to experience it themselves is to encourage them to do a break. So that's where the idea of creating a challenge came from. Let's make a challenge. Let's make it like doing a Tough Mudder or a Spartan race. Come on, it's just a challenge. We're going to do 90 days together. It's cool. It's fun, right? One of these, what's that other really good one? It's gone off the top of my head. It's really tough.
75 hard.
That's it, 75 hard, right? Yeah. So, you know, there's no alcohol. So that was the idea. So we started off in that world and got people to do breaks from alcohol. And I think over the time and a lot of research, so I would speak to customers who've gone through our program and they would say, you know, this has changed my life. And I think the two things that people always say when they take a break from alcohol are, number one, I had no idea the truth of the impact alcohol was having on me. Yeah. And number two, I wish I'd done this sooner, right? That makes me pretty passionate because if I can convince them and get them to do it earlier, then they're going to make that realization, right? So the second thing that people said was, you know, it took me years before I plucked up the courage to sign up to your challenge. And I mean, you know and understand about marketing, right? So you know how much it costs if somebody is watching your marketing material for years before they sign up to something. It's not a very good business model. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. And also in that is, if it takes them years, How many hangovers and how many issues and how many problems are they going through, and how many missed opportunities and everything else are they going through those years that we've done misjustice because it took them years to go, do you know what, I'm going to take a break. The second thing, we then put out a piece of research, which has now been taken by over 40,000 people around the world. And it asked various questions, but the main point of the question was, what would you like your relationship with alcohol to look like? And answering that question, 6% of people said that they'd like to stop drinking.
Completely.
Okay? Yeah, 6% want to stop drinking. 30% said they're fine as we are, so we'll get those people later. They're in denial at the moment. And the other 64% said they'd like to have a better relationship with alcohol. Okay? So if we only talk about sobriety, if we only talk about not drinking, we're only talking to 6%. Everyone else goes, oh, well, that's not for me, or I don't want to, or there's nothing for me, so I don't know what to do. So that is what we kind of realized. And when we changed our messaging, we changed our positioning to control, which, first of all, we had to do the research to say, is it possible? Can people control their drinking? I had to do that myself first, get that into that space. And the answer is yes. I mean, there's so much science out there. There is not just abstinence-based programs. Since the 1980s, I mean, years we've been helping people reduce alcohol consumption. We've been using controlled drinking in various different studies. There are many books on it. So it's not a new thing.
Yeah.
It's just that the rise and the popularity of the sobriety messaging is where we need to really turn that corner to say either mindful drinking, reduced alcohol, we can call a better relationship with alcohol. You could say a healthier relationship with alcohol, but of course there is no healthy relationship with alcohol because it's 100% toxic poison. So again, I told you there's no short answers with me. I'm sorry. But so we've got the beginning part where we had challenges that help people take a break from alcohol. And then we kind of 2 years ago, we were like, well, what is it to help people to control their drinking? Can you take somebody who is drinking significantly, and I'm not talking about waking up in the morning and drinking whiskey and drinking all day. I'm not talking about, so just for description purposes, we don't use words like alcoholic. We don't use alcoholism. Those words are more focused on the brain disease model and disease models, which by the scientific community today have been mostly debunked. We use alcohol use disorder. That in the scientific community, that is the description of somebody. And it's a sliding scale. If you are any one of these four things regularly, then you have a level of alcohol use disorder. So interestingly, people can go in and out of alcohol use disorder in their lives. Most people do. In your 20s, we drink like fish. And then 30s and 40s, most people start to calm down, right? So the part was to take somebody who would be on that sliding scale of alcohol use disorder, mild, heavy, sometimes even severe. Can you get that person to be able to control their drinking? And so as we started to look at the science and the research here, all of it was pointing into the same kind of directions, that ultimately we know what drives compulsive behavior. We've known across the scientific community in various studies the things that increase the propensity for a desire of compulsion, okay? Again, let's just take one side step here. What is addiction? Okay, what is the definition of addiction? A compulsive behavior that you repeatedly do even though you know it hurts you.
Yeah.
Well, that's scrolling through social media when you should be sleeping, right? That is binge watching cake or binge watching Netflix when you really know you should be getting on with some work or just trying to numb out with it, or numb out with anything, or numb out with work. I mean, work, the world's most accepted addiction.
Workaholics, yeah.
So this level of addiction is very prevalent across society. We are all a sliding scale of addicts at different times, at different points in our life. That is not to differentiate with very severe addiction, which is another level, okay? But we're on the sliding scale. So when we started looking at the individual parts, it's like, okay, well, if we can help people with things that drive compulsive behavior, if we focus on those things that do drive it, and we help coach them through changing them, do they get into a place where they can control their drinking? Well, so far the answer is yes. 600 people through the program. Okay, you could say that's not a huge cohort, but that's massive when people come through it. They are put into a place, right? The real stats are 93% of people choose to be alcohol-free after the program, even though they came in looking for control. A year later, this is very early research, 78% are still alcohol-free, 22% are choosing to control their drinking. So the thing was here in launching this and creating something is, A, we can help people earlier. B, we can help a much wider audience of people out there in the world if we talk about control. And C, the most important one, the reason why you have a problematic relationship with alcohol, or the reason why alcohol is showing up problematically in your life, is down to how you are living. And you can change those things. You are powerful. You can change those things. What an amazing answer.
Yeah.
Rather than you have a disease or this was because of your parents. No, you can change it.
It's really interesting, and there's so much I want to unpack from what you've just said, but I love the idea that you're helping people take back control rather than you're almost a victim to this poisonous substance and there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Well, the latter is what facilitates the pharmaceutical industry, facilitates the whole healthcare system, especially in the US.
Yeah.
That's what it's based on, right?
Yeah.
You're helplessly overweight. Ozempic is the answer. What, rather than good diet, good exercise, all of those things. So yeah, the helpless and you need a pill is what the healthcare system is primarily driven by.
Yeah.
Not holistic. You can fix this. You need a coach. You need an accountability partner. You need somebody there supporting you and a roadmap of the things that you need to work on.
And I guess it's hard for people to see that because it does seem like, oh, there is this quick fix solution in terms of what you've just said
versus doing the hard work.
Exactly. And it is hard. It is hard.
hard.
But I love that you're helping people through that. And something that you also just touched on is the problems that alcohol can bring into our lives. And something you said I thought was really interesting is that the question isn't necessarily, do you have a problem with alcohol? It's, do you think alcohol is causing you any problems? And I really love this reframe. And I just wondered if you could explain what that difference is.
Yeah. Well, the first question, do you have a problem with alcohol? 99% of the listeners, 99% of the people in the room right now walk out because it's not relevant to them.
Yeah.
And does alcohol cause you problems? 100% of people are still in the room who drink, because it does every single time, right? It causes you to feel the hangover the next day. You feel low, you feel anxious, you feel a little bit depressed. Shit, what did I say last night? What did I do? Or maybe some blackouts, right? What is a blackout? I can't remember something at some point. I mean, we were working alongside Stirling University, and they didn't publish this. They were looking at students across the Scottish population. 84% are regularly experiencing blackouts. 84% of students are regularly not knowing how they get home, or how they got into the taxi, or what happened at that point in the night. Holy Moses, scary, right? So is alcohol causing you problems? Nobody can say no to that. And so if we're in prevention, and this is where we are, we're not in cure. I don't want to be in cure. Cure is too late. And I think society is moving more towards prevention. If we're in prevention, then let's talk to people all the way through the journey. Like, hey, are you feeling like you have a bit of a hangover? Would you like to be able to drink less? Oh, I can't. Once I start, I just go straight onto shots. Well, it doesn't need to be that way. That's driven by this desire to numb out. Like, what are you numbing out? What is it that we need to figure out for you? And so getting people to make the switch between this is some kind of unfathomable problem that I can't fix to absolutely I can fix this and I can solve it, and here is the roadmap, I think is the key part. And also just tidying that up into there is, I think that the reason to encourage people to do this, right, about alcohol is that we're so lied to about alcohol. You know, it's so normalized, it's absolutely everywhere, but it's also completely ridiculous that is true because it's 100% poison. It is so bad for your brain. It's so bad for your body. It's creating, we now link it directly to 7 different cancers. But the truth is, in part by consuming alcohol, the inflammation it causes, it creates a sort of lovely bed for creating cancer or facilitating cancers, dementia, Alzheimer's. Okay, so lots of young people look at all that and go, yeah, but we hear that about everything today. We hear that about sugar. We hear that with McDonald's. We hear that, all of that stuff. But when we actually look at the truth of alcohol, it is so bad that if we were to start over again now, there's no way it would be available out there. And, we can talk about this later, but there needs to be a drug reclassification, the truth about what is a really unhealthy, toxic drug that causes problem. I don't know if you know, but Professor David Nutt, he worked for the UK government, and a huge study, which he did in the UK government. They kicked him out for publishing it. He then did it in 13 different European countries. The same study, the same results, which is that alcohol is the world's most harmful drug, right? That's more harm to the individual and to society at large than any of the other drugs because of its availability, because of the way it harms our brain and bodies, because of the social impact, the economic impact is huge. So when we go to that negative side, right, we've got the negative side. Let's look at the other side of that, because lots of people are bored of hearing that. We hear that about getting cancer from our shoes and everything else is bad for us. This is the one thing that you're looking for, and this is where we try to steer people. You've been trying to lose a bit of weight. I mean, not only the calories, but actually the way that alcohol interacts with our bodies, it stops you, it prevents you from losing weight because the liver has to process this highly toxic substance. So it's a great way to lose weight. It's a great way to start looking younger. I mean, so many people remove alcohol and their skin looks better, their eyes look brighter. I have a crazy idea, but what we need to do is show this as a sample size. But a big proportion of pregnancy glow is actually people stopping drinking.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we want to look healthier, feel better, but it's not just that, it's the energy you get, it's the productivity you get, it is the clarity you get, right? I mean, you're trying to build this wonderful podcast here. Why would you want to add something which is going to remove 20% of your IQ? It's going to make you think less clearly for at least a week, even just a small amount of consumption. It's going to dull down your wisdom and intuition because it affects the prefrontal cortex where those areas are. It's going to make you make less rational decisions, less moral judgment. Doc Amen, right, one of the world's famous psychologists, psychiatrists, most amount of brain imaging in California, he says, how often do you want your prefrontal cortex, one of the most important areas of your brain, to go on holiday? Because every time you choose to drink, that's what you are choosing to do. So culminating in all of that is both, well, I don't want those negative things, and I really want those positive things. I want to build my business. I want to get promoted. I want to be healthier, happier, fitter, and everything else. And I think that is the reason, rather than focusing on the problem and all of that, is kind of creating a different vision of what it is to reconsider your relationship with alcohol.
It's really interesting hearing you refer to these different bits of research, because most people will be able to look at their own lives and periods where they've drank too much or had that night out, and we all know, you get the hangover, you might get the anxiety, you maybe made some bad decisions the night before, but it's great to hear like what the science is behind that. And I also really love this idea of focusing on the things you want to optimize for rather than all the issues it brings, because you're so right. Like, I have personally noticed since I've cut down on my drinking, not that I've ever been a big drinker, but I've just noticed how I am more energized. I can think more clearly. I don't have this brain fog. I find that if I've drank a lot, I lose a lot of motivation for the gym, for work, for life in general. And so I now know that if I want to be feeling my best and performing at my best, I'm not going to be drinking frequently. And a lot of guests that I've spoken to on the podcast have had the same realization. And I think that probably comes from being involved in like the health and fitness community, because people want to be healthy. And
there's a great
they want to
cultural
optimize
shift.
Performance, right? So I definitely feel like I'm sort of in that group, but a lot of people haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would be really great to unpick some of the non-obvious ways that alcohol can affect us, as you've just mentioned. And I think a really big one is that alcohol actually worsens stress in our lives, because
Completely.
we've heard the narrative of, like, you know, unwind at the end of the day, have a glass of wine, or, you know, stressful things at work, you might go out for some drinks, but actually it's having an adverse effect.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is, again, what, if you think about most of the reasons what people take alcohol for, it's actually facilitating that in the first place. And this is why it's so insidious. So as an example, I drink because I have social anxiety. Well, alcohol is bottled anxiety. Yeah, so do you really have social anxiety, or are you still in that perpetual motion of the mental impact of drinking? So they reckon that if you drink at the risky limit, which is what, 4 drinks, I mean, nothing, right? That's the early part of the evening. If you drink 4 drinks, it could be up to 2 weeks of that mental impact, up to 2 weeks. And you think you're hungover only on Sunday. I mean, sure, when you're 25, when young, it doesn't really matter that hangovers are far less. But trust me, when you get older, they rapidly get worse. So sleep. A lot of people are like, I take it because it helps me sleep. But actually, it's a major disruptor of sleep. You know, it stops you getting deep sleep and REM sleep. It knocks you out. It makes you fall asleep because it helps switch off this busy brain that you've done nothing to calm. You've done nothing to deal with your stresses, deal with your stuff, sort out the baggage, blah, 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 blah. You're just taking a drug to try and switch it off. Well, then it stops you having restful sleep. So you wake up the next day, you feel tired. Well, tiredness compounds your central nervous system again. And then once again, that makes you less resilient to stress. So you get to the end of the day and you need another drink again. And that's that perpetual motion that alcohol does. Most drugs beget themselves. So they facilitate the need to take it again and again and again and again.
Sure.
And that's exactly how alcohol behaves. So one tiny thing I wanted to sidestep into here is, whilst we go into the super negatives about alcohol, I think it's really important to mention that drinking is fun. Right.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of podcasts out there and messages are just like, there are no benefits.
Yeah.
There's no reason to drink alcohol. Well, that's bollocks.
No, you're right. And I,
It's
again,
nonsense.
speak from personal experience that some of my best memories with my friends have been whilst we're out drinking.
Totally.
And I know Chris Williamson says that if you don't think a night out can be enhanced by alcohol, you've probably never had a good night out.
Exactly.
And it's true. So I'm glad you bring that point up.
100%. I think, alcohol is a lot. I love drinking. I love getting on the smash. I would love to go. I mean, used to be back in the day, my favorite thing was the following morning. You're still going and everyone's lost their head a little bit. And I'm like, wow, finally everyone's down at my level. It's that and hanging out with, kindergarten kids. I'm usually on the same wavelength. So not the two at the same time, obviously. So I love drinking. It's the consequences.
Yeah.
If there are no consequences, who cares, right? It would be great, but that's not the truth. The consequences are actually so much greater and often than what we realize. And I think that where we've got to realize inside this is, if your only source of fun is alcohol, then that's where you need to ask yourself the question, because you're building that neural pathway inside your brain that the only time you have fun with your friends is when you're drinking.
Yeah.
And if your friend circle is like that, then you need to encourage or steer it a little bit further away. You need to start doing things like, go to the climbing center and do a climbing wall together, on a Friday night. You're releasing dopamine, you're being with friends, and you're teaching your brain to have fun that doesn't include alcohol, right? Maybe you go and take up paddle with a group of friends. Like, doing socializing and releasing dopamine at the same time is a great way to teach your brain that actually there's fun elsewhere. It's really important, and we don't find that laughter enough, and so, going to the comedy together or putting on something and finding that laughter that you have to really teach your brain, because it can get to that dangerous place where you're like, well, life is shit without alcohol. You know, alcohol's really fun and it's the only fun I have. And the message there is not that life is boring in a whole. The message is that your life is boring and that you need to find some things that not just include alcohol.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because when I first moved to London, it seemed like the only thing to do to meet new people was to go out drinking and go on the nights out. And sure, I'd make good friends in like the girls' toilet for one night.
Yeah.
And then we'd be besties. And then the next day, don't even know who they are,
Yeah.
you know. Whereas now I feel very fortunate that me and my friends will do lots of different things, like going to run clubs, and that's been great because, as you say, doing that activity, you get like the dopamine, like the endorphins are flowing, and there's no alcohol involved in that. And I also think for me, a really big change is having something that matters more than just the night out and the, you know, dealing with the hangover. For example, this podcast is something that I want to put a lot of time and energy into, and I'm not going to be able to do that as well if I'm constantly drinking.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if sometimes people who drink regularly and don't mind the consequences of that don't have anything else that matters
Yeah.
enough.
There's lots of it in that. So we nearly touched on stress, and then I took it off into a different
It's okay.
direction. It happens a lot. In part, stress is such a major driver. So when we look at the 10 core drivers of compulsive behavior that we look at in complete control, number one is our past experiences as a child. We could use the trauma word, right? But a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't have childhood trauma." So we can delve into that a bit deeper. But trauma, we all have experiences in our past that we perceived a moment that we didn't understand, and we felt a intense emotion that we didn't really understand because our prefrontal cortex had not yet developed. And that emotion was so intense that we started to learn to pack it down. And we live in a society which cultivates packing down emotions. Come on, they're there, pick yourself up, move on, be strong, absolutely else, rather than tell me how you're feeling, how does that feel, what does it feel inside you, what's that, you know, and all of that stuff about emotional regulation that we now understand, and hopefully we're starting to pass on to future generations. But so we all have these past experiences that drive us, some very significantly, some very significant traumas, but some people can be driven significantly by what is a very slight situation, just a crossword or a loud experience, or being left to cry out in the room and feeling that sense of loneliness. It can be very small. And that's why we're now starting to understand that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. It's not, there is not a list of severity. It's about how impactful it was for you in that moment. Okay? And so this is a major part of what drives us to take the edge off, to numb out and everything else. What this does, this past experiences and things like that, is we kind of carry this around, and it becomes part of how our central nervous system is regulated. So our central nervous system, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. And those two modes are either recovery or fight and flight. I'm being attacked by a tiger, okay? Cortisol, the main hormone that is for the fight and flight mode, if you like. And so what happens is our past experiences, these things that we haven't really dealt with, as well as our stresses in life, impact our central nervous system. So on a daily basis, let's say your propensity to deal with stress is this high because of where you are. If you add in the trauma, all the everything, suddenly your stress amount of tolerance is here. And you know those people, if you think about that logically, that is the person who freaks out at the tiniest thing, right? They've run out of oat milk at the cafe and they're blowing their head, right? Who cares? Just get it with a different milk. Very, very low tolerance for there. And we can often be there. We can be there ourselves. Low sleep, problems in our life, financial issues, somebody just dumped us, and everything else, the slightest thing, and I'm going to punch you in the face, right? So that is a compounded, dysregulated nervous system. And what we now understand in all of this about stress, what I discovered as I was looking at the research here, an amazing woman, Dr. Rajita Sinha at Stanford. Nope, she's not at Stanford. It's at the top of my head. I'm going to come back to it 1 second. It's one of the universities, amazing university, Yale. There you go.
Yep.
Dr. Rajita Sinha, the head of addiction research at Yale University. 35 years studying addiction. Amazing woman. 130 peer-reviewed studies into addiction. And I'm talking to her, and she said, 2 years ago, I turned around to Yale University's board, and I said, I want to change the name of the department. And I was like, they were like, what? Why? She said, I want to change it from Yale University's study for addiction to Yale University's study for stress. Because addiction is just the outcome, right? Now, if you think about the gravity of that, stress today, in today's world, are you kidding me? It's off the charts.
Yeah.
Well, so is addiction, right? So is compulsive behavior. So if stress is the major source of compulsive behavior, why are we not helping people more with their stress? Why are we not saying, are you drinking too much? Then maybe we need to look at the stresses in your life and what's going on with your central nervous system. So to describe it as a visual, imagine that every single day when you wake up in the morning, you know those little plastic toy cars you have, which are with a little plastic dynamo. You push them a little bit and they shoot across the room even more because they've got a dynamo inside them. Now, the more past trauma you have, the more neurodivergence, ADHD, bipolar, these things, the more geared that is, right? So the smaller you push it, the more it gets wound up, the more hyperactive it gets, okay? Now, there are things in life which add to that stress. So cortisol being the main hormone of fight or flight. If you drank alcohol last night, then that is it's already running. That means you slept poorly. Sleep deprivation, it's now running again, okay? Coffee, significant cortisol release. So now it's wound up even more. How many coffees? More coffee. Now you get into the office. You go straight from meeting, more stress. I worked out hard this morning. I'm stressing. Now, what everyone does is they get to their end of their day, having wound this thing up all day, and they go, okay, now I'm going to relax. And they put that car down for the first time it's got a chance to unwind. And it goes shooting off into the distance, right? And that's our brains. The moment you're trying to relax. Well, that is just dysregulation. You have not done anything to regulate your nervous system during the day. So I want people to understand some very simple math. A stressed out central nervous system, which doesn't get any recovery during the day, will always require numbing in the evening.
Yes.
And either it's binge watching Netflix, doom scrolling through social media, eating cake, or drinking alcohol, right? So the only way for us to mitigate that significant drive for compulsion is for us to find calm during the day. Right. And this is where meditation, this is where getting out for yoga class at lunchtime, this is where going to just go to the park for 5 minutes and walk around, but do breath work. Breath work now is the fastest way to get our central nervous system to go from fight or flight into recovery. Andrew Huberman talks about the physiological sigh, 2 inhales. Do you know the physiological sigh? Let's just teach everyone it now. You can do it with me because this is proven to be the fastest way to get your central nervous system from fight or flight into recovery. So it's 1 long inhale, short, sharp, right to the top inhale, and then long, slow exhale. So it goes like this.
Oh, okay.
Do 1 more because they're going to do it with us while listening, okay?
Yep.
10 of those.
Yeah.
So simple. 1 minute in between a Zoom call. Coming from sorting out the kids, at drop off, nightmare, to relaxing for what's next. In between different moments, just after recording this podcast, just before recording it. Those things are what give that central nervous system some recovery. I'm going to stop and give you a chance to speak, but we actually use an amazing device, right, in our complete control program. We send people the device, it remotely monitors their central nervous system, and it shows them minute by minute whether they're in fight or flight or recovery. And this technology enables our coaches to say, look, you've spent all day in absolute red, like total stress, so much stress on your central nervous system. Can I explain what that means? Your system needs to go into recovery in order for your brain to regenerate, right? In order for your whole system to start regenerating and looking after itself, to release healthy cells, right? That needs to happen. And you're not getting any of it, not only during the day, but you're not getting any of it at night. And so this is why you're wondering why you're drinking. This is the main reason. So getting people to understand how stressed out they are. Most of us are unbelievably stressed out. And that a huge proportion of their desire to take the edge off at the end of the day is driven because they haven't done something so simple as take some breaths.
Yeah. I think it's really good to talk about how the reason people are turning to alcohol at the end of the day is because they've been in this stressed out zone. And actually, I think we've sort of normalized living in this stressful environment, especially in huge cities like London, where we're commuting, we have busy jobs, we have 101 other things to do. And actually to say to people, you shouldn't be feeling this way constantly, and maybe there are things that you can do throughout the day or at the end of the day that are going to help mitigate some of that before you feel like you need to have a drink. So I'm really glad that you've touched on all of that. So you mentioned earlier that there are several driving factors for compulsive behavior.
We focus on 10 core drivers.
What are some of the things that people can look out for?
Yes. We talked about trauma, stress really being a major source. We can all start there. Linking onto that, sleep, environment, meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose is huge. People don't realize how big meaning and purpose is, or lack thereof. This was a discovery of my own life of being, well, hang on a minute, the only thing I'm doing here is being an oil broker in London, and whilst that's great and a great job and everything else, it's not why I was put on the planet. And I didn't realize at the time how much that was facilitating this desire to take the edge off my life, because I wasn't living congruently with who I am.
To sort of escape reality a little bit.
Exactly. So helping, and a lot of people are lost with this meaning and purpose thing. A lot of people are, oh, well, what is this whole purpose thing and how can we do it? And what we come down to with a lot of people is very often, if you have a high level of emotion, so let's call you an empath or on the scale of empathic or highly empathic, right? Therefore, you have a significant level of emotion. You haven't learned to deal with that. And again, neurodivergence can often drive this, ADHD, bipolar, things like that, or just be a very emotional human being. So, and again, trauma drives into clearly, obviously, more emotional, lack of emotional regulation. So what happens is you take somebody who has very strong, powerful emotions, and then they look to seek to numb that out. So, of course, the more emotional you are, the more likely you are to have a problematic relationship with a substance, because you're going to try and numb out those emotions with something outside of yourself you've never been taught to regulate. So on the other side of people who have a problem with alcohol is actually people who are really empathic. And that's the beauty about the 1 Year No Beer community, and I guess the sobriety community anyway, is that you've got a much higher proportion of people who have a deep sense of emotional connection or want of emotional connection. In line with a heavy level of emotions or emotional intelligence is usually a desire to help others, right? And so what many, 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 many people, I can't give you a percentage, but it's very high, realize is that in the work that they are doing, in the things that they are doing on a daily basis, is not actually helping other people in the way that they feel congruent with. And what's amazing about that problem is that that is actually quite an easy thing to solve. It's actually quite easy to help others. I teach my daughters this all the time. The other day, we're just in Palma, and I'm like, shall we give some kindness? And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. And I was like, well, there's a flower shop there. And how many do you want to buy? And they were like, let's get 10. So we buy 10 roses, and then we stand in the street. And they have to get past this fear, this social anxiety of, can I approach a person and give them a flower? It was just the most beautiful thing, because they got into conversations with everyone had a story. And these old women who were passing were hugging the girls like, this is the most kind thing anyone has done for me in months. And I'm like, girls, do you see how simple it is? How you feel right now to be that kindness, to give that element, but the impact it had on somebody's life just by being a little bit kind That's how low the bar is in society.
I know, it's true.
So I got onto that because, meaning and purpose can be really big for people. Again, people listen to these things and then they go, well, that's all great. I don't have a mission that I've been struck by lightning, I've met the Dalai Lama. So what do I do while I'm sweeping floors or this crappy job that I don't really love? Remember this. Direction is as powerful as destination when it comes to many of these things. You don't need to be running or that dog home for unloved dogs. You don't have to be doing that. You just have to know that that's the direction you're going.
Yeah.
Because once you find the direction, then everything changes. Then it's like once the ship sets sails in a direction, it's identified as a ship. Before that, it's a raft or a pier, right? So your level of identity of, you know what, I want to set up a podcast like Ruby has, but in this niche.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to do that, but what's going to happen the moment you make that decision? You start reading about podcasts. You start talking about it. You start meeting people. And that is the fulfillment that you need to say, do you know what? My life's not shit and boring. I'm going to drink alcohol right now. So an important one to remember, direction is as powerful as destination. It's about getting clear. Hang on a minute. I am drinking because I'm feeling a bit lost. What direction do I need to head in to change it?
Yeah, I really like that because I think we all get too caught up in what's the big thing that I need to be working towards, and I haven't found my passion yet, or I haven't found the reason I'm meant to be here. And that can be so hard, but having some sort of direction, I think, is really powerful, can have such a big impact on someone's life. And
Massive.
as you're talking there, it's really interesting to think about the reasons why someone might turn to drinking and excessive drinking. And my dad, who passed away last year, had a very complicated relationship with alcohol. He did have periods of stopping, going sober, but it didn't last that long. He'd always turn back to drinking. And I've, I guess, grappled with understanding addiction and how it works, and why people are able to abuse this like substance when it's clearly having such a negative impact on their life.
Yeah.
And I know this might not be your exact field of expertise, but I think it would be interesting to just talk about what this sliding scale looks like of someone who has a few drinks every now and then, but knows their limits and can quite easily not drink, which is probably someone like myself. And then somebody who has a complete dependency on drinking and really struggles to see how they could stop. I guess for people listening, how can they work out where they are on that spectrum?
Well, first of all, thank you, for bringing that up. And I know this is a difficult subject for you, and I'm so sorry that this happened, and it's so complex.
It is.
For you left trying to resolve it and understand it, and why would he choose that, and all of those things. And so let's look at that for a second. Real addiction is not a choice. It's not, when you're getting further up there is no choice. The drive is so strong. The compulsion has gone past any form of rational decision. And the further down that sliding scale you get, the more this person will do and destroy and take in order to get that thing. It's not of the rational mind. If you look at the brain scans and things like that of real addiction, very heavy alcohol use disorder, those brains have changed. Those wiring and ways of operating have changed. The alcohol dulls this prefrontal cortex. It kind of rots the prefrontal cortex over time. We're using that for our rational decision making. We're using that to understand the world around us. That is specifically being eroded by alcohol. And it's not an on-off, which many people just go, I'm not one of them, so I'm okay. You are. You're on a sliding scale of one of them. And you either continue down the curve or you bring yourself back. And I think that we're all gently sliding down it as we age, as life gets heavier. We are constantly reiterating, my only source of fun is alcohol. My only source of de-stressing is alcohol. My only source of unwinding is alcohol. My only way to deal with kids is alcohol. I hear it time and time and time again. If you could wind forward to everyone's life right now, oh, I'm just having fun in my 20s. Well, that's how we all fucking started.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it began. Oh, it's just university. I'm just having fun in university. Yeah, but that's where you're building. That's where you're building the belief. That's where you're building the neural pathways. This is where the foundation is being laid. And as you progress through your life, that foundation gets harder and harder to crack through, to change. Now, we know from neuroscience you can change the brain. We know we can rebuild the prefrontal cortex. That takes time, right? We've been using a device in our program right now, which you can actually get on the NHS Flow Neuroscience. Amazing, 3 times more successful than any antidepressant for treatment-resistant depression. But it's a TDCS machine, which is a transdermal cranial stimulation. So it electrocutes the prefrontal cortex, and with these tiny electrical pulses, it's encouraging the rebuilding of neural pathways. Similarly, magic mushrooms, right? One of the most powerful ways to start rebuilding the prefrontal cortex. Many people can go and have one session with magic mushrooms and not drink again, right? And these are growing in the garden. This is amazing. So, well, maybe not your garden, but I'm from Scotland. You grow in my garden. So the first point here is that there almost is that you can't look at it from a rational perspective, like of your mind, of why somebody would behave like that.
And I do appreciate you saying that, just to interject quickly, because I think it is really difficult when you see the damage that someone's done to their life. And their body and the impact it's had on people around them. Because, me and my rational, sober brain is thinking, well, why would you do that? Why can't you just stop? But actually, as you say, the drink itself is having such a big impact on that individual's brain. Exactly.
And with all of my heart and soul, this is what I'm trying to change in the world. Our system of supporting people like your dad is incredibly broken. It's based on 1950s science. It is rehab, and most of the doctors and the healthcare system is based on very broken, rubbish information, actually many cases lies. I mean, private equity businesses have been buying up rehabs and taking parts of the program out to reduce their success rates below 10% because it increases shareholder value. Their meat in a profit-making business. That is a 39 billion very broken industry that I want to disrupt.
Sure.
And when it comes to this part here is, if we could have had a conversation and help him see of the various areas of his life, it's not an overnight thing, but he's probably caught in that place of being, well, I'm always going to be like this. I've tried. Every time I stop drinking, it comes back worse. Yeah, we know.
And
we know it does.
Yeah, I think with my dad, there was a slight stubbornness attached to it of, well, what do you mean I can't have a drink?
Yeah.
I can have a pint at the pub if I want, but obviously not when you've done so much damage to your body.
Yeah. And so the solution now is you can only not drink, okay? Which for him was like a reality that he never wants to make peace with.
Yeah.
So what happens is he drops into abstinence and then he comes back to problematic drinking. And again, those two build, right? We've shown this in science so often that the aversion of something creates the desire for it. Trying not to do something builds the desire. So if we could have had a conversation with him and say, yeah, absolutely you can, but you have to do these things in order to get there. This is a skill that you're going to have to learn. And in order to do that, these are the things that we're going to have to start to work on, which is doing the trauma work, right? And I don't know what that looks like for him or what there was that was traumatic in there. What about stress? What about environment? What about meaning and purpose? What about social connection? What about environment? All of those things.
Yeah.
And then I think you were saying, okay, great. What can we do to help somebody? What are the things that we can do to help somebody? I think that there is no harm in pointing them in the direction of what we do at oneyearnobeer.com. There is a lot of resources there. We have a podcast it's not currently promoting, but if you look at the 7 years of podcasting that we've done and the experts and scientists that we've brought on, there's everything that you would need in there for free that will help you change your relationship with alcohol. If you want a bit more support, we have challenges and programs and community and group programs and all of that kind of stuff, which are for less than the cost of a night out, from 50 quid up to. If you want a more intensive program, something that uses technology, data, evidence, and all of those things, it's like a preventative rehab. It is an amazing program, game-changing, complete control. That is thousands of pounds. It's a very powerful program. And I think that on top of that, so putting people onto the resources, this podcast with you here, the other podcasts that I've done, is a great way to start that conversation going. Again, when it gets to the very, very, very severe, when somebody is very, very severe, they're going to need support with a doctor. They're going to need support with these things in here. Often it is a small encouragement with them of one tiny little step. We talk about this sometimes in the addiction pieces, is what is the smallest step that person can positively take. And if that is just listen to a podcast on it, that is the beginning of some kind of progress in there.
Yeah, because it can feel, I guess, like a huge mountain to climb.
Huge.
And as you say, not everybody is willing to climb to the top if they don't see a life where they're completely sober. But I think what your business does so brilliantly is obviously push people in the right direction and teach them that there is a life where you can have a controlled relationship with alcohol.
Yep.
Yes, some people might find it easier and might prefer to be sober. I know you've had a conversation with Rich Roll, who's a prime example of that. But then there'll also be other people who want to be able to have a drink now and then and just know that it's not going to have a huge impact on their lives. So yeah, I think what you're doing is really
well. Let's
really
put
great.
that into a quick analogy, right? Because the most important thing here is, let's say that you're listening and you feel like you are overweight. Now, right now, between us here, we've got no idea what that means. Are they lying in a double bed and, haven't been able to get themselves out of bed for the last year, but eating pizza every day, right? Let's say you're at some sliding scale of overweight. Now, I'm telling you, I guarantee you can run a 5K. Now, unless there's some other major, severe underlying health issue here that means it, but even that we can probably overcome. Even with the right tools, we can overcome that. There may need to be surgery. You might need a prosthetic limb. I don't know what it is for you, right? But you can do it. And so that is exactly the same situation here. When it comes to your drinking, I don't know how obese you are right now. You could be the drinking equivalent of lying in bed all day and doing all that stuff. But what I do know from the science, what I do see from this stuff is it is possible. It may be a lot of work and it may be a lot of doing this over time to get there. And I can show you the route and I can guide your hand and give you the coach to do it. And on that journey, you might say, do you know what? I've lost 50% of everything I'm here, or I've shedded a ton of weight, or I'm now not drinking. And this is what happens with most people. I now am not drinking. I'm not drinking because none of me wants to. And I don't want to go back to how I was. And I've got no intention to drink right now. I just don't want to add that back into my life. That is the place of ultimate empowerment. Not, I'm not drinking because if I have a drink, I'll die. And that's the fucking problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem. I'm not drinking because if I have a drink. I'm not drinking because I have a drink. Oh, shit, I had a drink.
No, exactly. It's about having the control. And again, as I said earlier, like not being a slave to that thing. And had another guest on the podcast who tried like cutting out alcohol just to see if the grass was greener on the other side. And for him, it was. And I think for most people it is, because you realize in what ways alcohol perhaps was causing you issues, and now that you don't drink or you've cut down on drinking, how many good things can come from that.
So that's it.
And I really, really hope that people will implement some of what you've said in this conversation today, and also arrive at the same conclusion. I do have to ask you my one final question, and we're going to have to keep it short, which is...
I'll try and keep it short.
If you had to give someone a piece of advice to help them achieve their personal best, share a quote or something, what would it be?
Well, you know what it is. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, if you are regularly consuming alcohol, then this is the one thing that will unlock your personal best. The very quick answer: drinking alcohol opens the doors to so many negative situations. Eating a kebab, not exercising the next day, not looking after myself, not meditating, can't be bothered to do my stuff. It opens all the doors to the negative things. Similarly, choosing not to drink closes those doors, but opens all the doors to the good things. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to look after myself. So the difference between you drinking and you not drinking are not just not drinking. They are miles apart. And so I guarantee you, your route to the personal best should start with you taking a break from alcohol, because the other things will just fall into place.
Perfect answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
No
Ruari.
problem.
I really, really appreciate you coming to talk to me today.
Yeah.
And I really hope people have enjoyed this. I'm sure they will. And if they want to check you out, find out about 1 Year No Beer, where can they go?
Yeah, oneyearnobeer.com, OYNB on most socials.
Perfect.
And nobody will be able to spell it, but Ruari Fairbairns, I'm the only one with a name like that on all social media. And feel free to reach out, DM me. I'm on Insta and Facebooks and all of those social things.
I will link it all in the description. But yeah, thank you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks.